Episode 201, Breakdown and Reaction. Please note that this video does contain spoilers. Prologue. I'm calling him Myron. It was completely inappropriate for the early Sauron to call himself Sauron. Sauron in Elvish means basically abhorred one, disgusting, vile monster man. I believe this was simply to communicate his identity to the general audience, but you know what? To me, this was unacceptable. I'm very sorry. The coronation/assassination scene was really well done and quite gruesome, but I do wish we could have seen a few more moments of Sauron at work before this betrayal. Sauron's disdain for the orcs felt very on brand for him, as well as his swiftness and anger. Like, he just started stabbing that guy a lot out of nowhere. His speech was also very in character for Sauron, and it reminded me a lot of the way that Halbrand spoke in season 1, so that was a nice connection. I really did enjoy the subtle moments of characterization with this early Sauron. He's fiddling with his rings, he's kind of stroking his hair when he's stressed, and he's looking to Adar for almost reassurance. This is a Sauron who has not figured it all out and lacks confidence, and I think that is very pathetic and baby girl of him, so I'm here for it. Let's talk about Guru-Ron, though. The idea that Sauron's spirit remained physically manifested in this blob of stringy goo which eats bugs and rats and ultimately some poor woman, that was an interesting choice. The way that Guru-Ron flopped down the mountainside was so funny that I could not stop laughing, which unfortunately pulled me out of the story a little bit, but I guess if we're trying to see Sauron in this very pathetic state, it worked. I think, I'm trying to imagine an alternative. If the goo would have been walking, that would have looked probably even worse. So I'm not sure what my proposed solution would have been, but I just feel like Guru-Ron sliding down this mountain and like flopping off of a rock was really funny. Let's talk about the raft and pouch explanation. To be honest, I've been waiting 2 years for an explanation of what's in the pouch. Turns out it doesn't matter. The only thing that's important about the pouch is the sigil. And the sigil didn't even belong to anyone important. It just belonged to some guy whose family once served royalty. I do think the message of the pouch is what was important, what the sigil meant. So I'm pretty happy with it. The explanation didn't feel like good enough for me because I've been waiting for so long, but it really wasn't bad. Although I do wonder why the sea monster didn't attack Sauron, which it also didn't do in season 1 either. So I don't know, did it recognize him? Is it some kind of like Maiar spirit creature sea monster who knows who Sauron is? If he does know who Sauron is, why didn't he attack him either? I don't know. There is this moment on the raft where we see Halbrand is looking at Galadriel quite evilly, if that's a word. And I don't think we saw this shot in season 1. Now, Charlie Vickers, who plays Halbrand, mentioned in an interview that while he was acting as Halbrand, he had a lot of moments where the mask would kind of slip while his character is off camera, and he would be acting more so as Sauron, and I kind of wonder if this is what he meant by that. One highlight of this episode is Sauron's near repentance. The most touching moments in this episode were the couple of times where Nicholas Woodson's character is offering Halbrand advice. I think it framed all of Halbrand's character in season 1 in this really helpful way. He explains that goodness is something that must be chosen every day until it becomes a part of your character. Halbrand seems to be someone who is still desiring goodness, but doesn't feel like he has the strength to commit to it, because even right before the sea monster crashes into the boat, he tells the character to kind of steady himself, which suggests that he actually cares for him a little bit. But then when push comes to shove, and the situation gets out of control, he is not going to help this man. He's instead going to steal his pouch and then leave him to die. So to me, this is a really good characterization for early Second Age Sauron, because he does want to be good, but he doesn't want to do the hard work of it. And goodness is not a habit for him either. A decision about the rings. I did enjoy the discussion and the debate amongst the elves about what to do with the rings. Elrond is strongly advising that they should be destroyed, and Círdan is initially in agreement. Galadriel is the most prideful of all the Noldor, and Gil-galad is so desperate to remain in Middle-earth that he's kind of willing to try anything. There's this moment after Galadriel ultimately confesses that Halbrand is Sauron where Gil-galad is just like, "Argh!" And I thought that was so funny. I don't know. I would react in the same way. Like, he is so mad, but he's also trying to restrain himself. There's also a moment later on in this episode where Gil-galad says, "Because of you, our enemy lives." And this must have hurt her so bad because I'm sure she was thinking of the moment in episode 8 where Halbrand says, "Sauron lives because of you." So really Gil-galad is kind of reinforcing this seed that Halbrand had planted in her mind. Galadriel was really so down bad for Halbrand, and she feels a lot of shame for it. Everyone is mad at her. She says, "I was deceived," and I love Elrond's response. He's like, "No, Galadriel, you were blinded by your own pride." So she's not really getting an easy way out of this situation. I think Galadriel is also refusing the possibility of the ring's corruption, maybe because she is so afraid that she herself has been corrupted. Now, ultimately, the rings are used by the elves, and they do put a pretty immediate halt to the elven fading, but at what cost? The Lord of Mordor. We've got another biblical reference here where Halbrand sort of mimics Moses when he tells Adar, "Let my people go." The moment in which the orcs are laughing at Halbrand was stunning, gorgeous, beautiful, a wonderful nod to the lore, and I appreciate it so deeply because there's a period of time in the Second Age where Sauron is sort of required to wear this fair form, and Tolkien writes very specifically that the orcs laugh at him. And so for them to include that little moment, I loved it. Sauron commanding the warg was also a really great moment, and I look forward to more of these illustrations of his power. I absolutely love the orc character Glug already. I have a feeling he's going to play an important role. Glug is extremely concerned that Sauron might return, which is likely going to drive a wedge between him and Adar. I also loved how the orcs are unapologetically brutal, and they should be. We should not really be sympathizing with these orcs. They are the bad guys, but at the same time, they are also children of Iluvatar, as we kind of began to wrestle with last season. And so we're really going to be kind of experiencing this probably conflicting storyline where you have someone behaving very, very badly, but they also have sort of this inherent dignity and worth. So I love that we're kind of not shying away from that, but we're going to face it head on. Adar's monologue about how he was transformed by Sauron was also really beautiful. Halbrand seemed genuinely moved by the story in some way, as you can kind of see him crying while he's listening. Sauron's manipulation of Adar is very clever too, and I can see the beginning of Halbrand as the king of men here too, because he negotiates to secure their freedom. So naturally, whenever he does need help from them, they'll probably be willing to help. I also loved the moment when Halbrand has to bow his head at Adar's feet and vow allegiance, and he says, "I vow to serve the Lord of Mordor to the end of my days and his." This has such a double meaning because Sauron sees himself as the Lord of Mordor, and then he also is going to probably bring about the last day of the current Lord of Mordor. I was so sad to see Waldreg die so soon, though. I had such big hopes for him. Círdan's perfection. Círdan has this really great line. I think it's actually his first line. He says, "Perfection exists only in Valinor." And when you think about how long poor Círdan is going to have to wait until he's able to go to Valinor, it hits even harder. However, later on in Círdan, after he has seen the ring, he does call the three rings perfection, which is interesting. He is a character that I didn't really have a very strong visual expectation for or image in my mind of what he might be like, because he's not someone I knew a ton about before going into the season, but I do feel the way they've done him is really stunning, and Ben Daniels radiates wisdom. Círdan has a moment where he's going to drop the rings into the water, but something splashes his boat and knocks him over, so then he takes the rings out of the bag and looks at them. He seems to be enamored by them, and I wonder, is this divine intervention? Because it seemed like more than just a regular wave that knocked him over. Elrond's desperation and wisdom. I can tell already that Elrond is going to be the standout character of this season. Where he was patient and diplomatic in season 1, he is taking absolutely note in season 2. His dialogue is so stunning, and you can see how deeply he senses the peril that all of Middle-earth is in, so he's willing to resort to these drastic measures to do what he thinks is right. Elrond perceives that Galadriel has somehow become bound to Sauron through this deception, and he's pretty upset by it. He has a couple of really good lines, too, where Galadriel says, "We chose this path together," and he's like, "No, you chose it for me." Once again, he's not letting her get away with all of this stuff anymore. He also says later, in this moment where they're talking about how Galadriel rejected Valinor, he's like, "Was the darkness calling to you?" And I think that was something really interesting to wrestle with for Galadriel's character. Now let's go over to Rune. In the very first shot that we see, the stranger is wandering around in the desert, and it really, really looks like Jesus as depicted in the Passion. It's almost too much. I can't imagine this was unintentional. So the stranger is continuing to be unable to control his power, which to me is getting old. He has this vision of the staff, and this seems to be a very strong hint that the stranger is Gandalf. The knobby staff that kind of is appearing in the air, I mean, it looks like Gandalf's staff. Here we also get the dreaded return of the Peter Jackson dialogue theft, where Nori says, "We're going in circles. Just admit it, we're lost," which is just like the opening to the Two Towers. The reunion with Poppy was insufficient to me. I didn't really enjoy the way that the walking song was actually revealed as a special way to navigate this one random desert either. Personally, I'm tired of these Harfoots and their bugs that they're eating. But I did love this little weird Mad Max guy with his weird little mask who's following Nori, Poppy, and the stranger. He's very odd and doesn't really feel particularly Tolkienian, but I think he's really cool, and I'm enjoying this storyline nonetheless. At the end of the episode, we finally find our way to Eregion, where Celebrimbor has just completed his new forge. It's funny that he says, "We finally completed our new forge. I sure hope the rings work so that we don't have to leave Middle-earth," because there's the thought there that he was going to put all of this work and resources and time into building this new forge, even though he might have to leave it, like next week. He hasn't heard any word from Lyndon, despite Gil-galad's message having been sent earlier in the episode. And then at the end of the episode, Halbrand arrives, and you can tell Celebrimbor is conflicted because he seems really happy to have a visitor. He's very lonely in Eregion, but he knows he's not supposed to hang out with Halbrand any longer. It was a short scene, but it was a good tease for episodes to come. So recapping episode 1 of season 2. Like with season 1, the episode is kind of a slow start to the season. I first watched it on my laptop, and I felt like it was a solid 7 out of 10. And then I watched it later on my TV, and I enjoyed it a lot more. So this is the kind of thing you really want to see on the big screen with the, nice speakers. I would have loved to see this in the theater. Usually, I do need a few rewatches to really sit with the story that they're telling, and I feel like this is going to be the same sort of situation because I feel like The Rings of Power is really meant to be savored rather than binged, and you kind of have to let the story settle in your mind. Most of the good moments in this episode were spoiled by the official marketing, so when I finally saw them in context, I wasn't as excited as I would have been otherwise, but you know what? I understand they've got to get people to watch their show, and I am probably too online. I do think it would be difficult for anything to live up to the vision that I've had for 2 years to craft in my mind of how I would have loved the show to go, like if I were in charge. At the end of the day, I think a second season is more difficult because of this. I went into season 1 with no expectations, so it was a blank slate, but I've spent 2 years dreaming of season 2, so it was a little hard to see my theories or my visions amount to nothing. However, I do have to remind myself, at the end of the day, I'm here to see McPayne's vision, and I'm just along for the ride. So I will continue to let them cook. Let me know what your thoughts were on episode 1 of season 2, and I will be back soon with my thoughts on episode 2.